in a sense, it wasn't such a shock to come to Wadham as only the third fellow, female fellow, because in a sense that's what I'd become used to, even though as an undergraduate I'd been in a women's college.
Well, I chose Wadham because I'd been in a mixed school all my life, and frankly I was just rather relieved that there was an opportunity to go to a mixed college for the first time in October 1974. That was the first cohort of women who came into the previously men's colleges anywhere in Oxford.
I mean, I was 29 when I came here, so in some ways lots of ways I was closer in age to some of the graduate students than I was to many of my colleagues, because generationally there was still very much an older generation of men who'd been in the college for years, who were still very much the driving force in the college, I suppose.
We, I think, blended into the college fairly comfortably. There weren't any great issues. People occasionally would stop us in the street and say, "My goodness, you're wearing a Wadham scarf. Are you actually a Wadham woman?" or whatever. But that was perfectly friendly.
Once they decided to go mixed, it became quite normal quite soon. I can't imagine Wadham without women.
We were all very struck by the fact that at the Freshers' dinner, Stuart Hampshire, who was the warden at the time, gave a welcome speech to the freshers and didn't mention the fact that there were women here, which we were slightly surprised about. And then we realised, of course, this was a brilliant idea, because he was simply saying, you are Wadham students and that's what defines you. And there's no more to be said about singling you out on the basis of your sex. That was rather undermined by the doctor who followed him on that particular evening, asking the gentleman to leave the room so that he could talk to the women about contraception.
I went in one day and there were some table decorations, and it turned out that Princess Margaret, I think, had been there the night before, and the table decorations were still all the way along the tables. And one of the emeritus fellows looked at me and beamed and said, "There are ladies present," and pushed the floral decoration so that it was in front of me on the table. I took it very kindly because it was very nicely meant, but I was a bit taken aback all the same.
I think gradually certain issues began to emerge. And my feeling overall is that an awareness of difference was something which was part of a broader awareness of diversity. And that what's happened for all students, but perhaps prompted originally by the presence of women in the college, is a much more supportive teaching environment, greater awareness of welfare issues, pastoral issues, support for learning, awareness of difference amongst students as a group, not necessarily just on gender lines, although I think gender issues are part of it.
I think, like a lot of people, my first impressions of Wadham came from the website, and Wadham makes it extremely clear, like front page, that they try extremely hard to be very progressive, and they want to respect everybody equally, and it's a very egalitarian sort of college and very unique in that way. And when I came here, I found very much they really live up to what they say.
I really liked that when we came here there were specific kind of provisions for women, kind of there's a tutor for women, and kind of the women's room and things like that. So I felt like we were integrated, but also they understood kind of what is needed for female students.
For me, it was a breath of fresh air, and I think it was really important that, I mean, the president of the SU and the president of the MCR are both women, and both really strong women. I feel like, and feminist in their, and I think that was a fantastic thing for me, coming from a university where women weren't necessarily appreciated and they didn't necessarily have roles of power within the college. So for me it was really important.
Well, I came to Wadham at 18 from a non-selective state school in Liverpool, and was like super impressed but also quite overwhelmed by the number of strong women that there were here, who seemed to be so far ahead of me in terms of their development and that kind of thing. I was really inspired though by Anna Bradshaw and other kind of strong women. Jarni Emmanuel was president when I started here as well, and was kind of everything I wanted to be. So it didn't take long for me to be more inspired than intimidated by it.
As I came in, I did see a lot of ladies around, you know, more so than more men. But then the domestic bursar was a lady, lovely lady. And now there's still a lady domestic bursar.
As a woman here myself, I was welcomed with open arms. A lot of people were very excited to see a woman chaplain. I haven't met anybody yet for whom that hasn't been a positive thing, although they may well be hidden.
Wadham students in particular sort of seem to be very involved in activism and in protests that were being organised about free education at the time, and all these kinds of things. So there were just so many great women students who were doing really cool things. So there was this real sense of the role of women at Wadham is speaking out, being leaders, fighting, and yeah, that was amazing.
Women who are already passionate and driven about women's issues or about radical issues in general are drawn to Wadham in the first place. You know, it is one of those colleges that lives up to its reputation. I'm really glad it does.
We know that there's a Wadham Feminist Society, that there are things like Queer Fest and Wadstock, which, although are sort of musical celebrations, actually they are sort of radical in what they're trying to do in terms of being sort of outside the usual Oxford academic kind of snootiness.
As a reporter on the other end of the phone, I told her it was Bert and Ernie and Velma and Wonder Woman. Let's turn the news on, he says. He walks the TV, which is lying on its back, and he lifts it up. It still works.
Okay, all right. Oh, that's all right then. Well, never mind then.
So I think in Wadham, you know, it's probably a lot less urgent than 40 years ago. And we've got a kind of gender balance, certainly among the undergraduates. But I think women still face, you know, challenges, face forms of discrimination.
I haven't really come across any problems, you know, like lady problems, here at Wadham specifically. But Oxford itself is still very much a place that's very male-dominated. And as a grad student, most of my classes are in the statistics department, which is a mathematical sort of science, which is known for being very male-dominated and having a very male sort of culture. So even though Wadham, I found as a woman specifically, I haven't had a lot of issues, there's still some strange barriers, almost like cultural barriers between male members of the department and female members of my department specifically.
Oxford as an institution is very male and is constantly set up in their favour. But I do think that Wadham can be a little safe haven, a little utopia from it, but it's definitely not perfect here at all.
I think it's quite intimidating as a young woman to walk into what's called governing body here, which is a meeting of all the fellows where you rather absurdly have to wear a gown to attend. And they fill the old library, and it's a lot of men in black gowns who are on average at least twice your age.
I think there's perhaps this interesting tension in a college that is in some ways known for being so liberal and progressive, actually still carries this incredible heritage of, in a sense, only 40 years of women, and that hasn't yet played through. So what I see really clearly modelled in the SU, in the MCR, perhaps isn't yet fully reflected in the SCR.
There can be some situations that are still intimidating as a young woman because they weren't designed for young women to be in them. I think I've found a lot of strength in having Diana next to me and knowing that we can go in and kind of be like us
dynamic
against the
duo.
world. Exactly.
Yeah.
And a united young female voice.
Wadham is this beautiful little idyllic bubble sometimes, but everyone is existing in the wider world, and there's still issues with harassment and sexual assault and all the other issues that are so kind of focused around university.
In Plush especially, which is the local LGBTQ nightclub, especially as like a petite woman, you just get shoved all the time. And I spent my entire life there with my netball elbows out, just being really aggressive. Literally, if I just want to go to the loo, go to the bar, or even if I'm standing still, dancing around, men will just kind of shove. And the thing is, they're not even always aware of it. They'll just walk past and not realise the kind of people they're littering in their wake.
I do remember this one time, a guy offered to buy me a drink in the bar, and I don't think I even explicitly said no. I was just saying, I'll just wait a sec. They were doing something at the bar or couldn't get to there. And he just turned around and said, oh, you know, you're such a stereotypical feminist. You won't even let me buy you a drink. And I was just so taken aback.
In a much more kind of overt and quite horrible way. Often get very like leery men who maybe if like you're with another girl there, or even if you're just there, like they will either follow you around, they'll pretend to be gay so that you feel more comfortable in their presence and then kind of use that to, I don't know, to then make a move or to do things that you wouldn't accept in another space.
NUS, the National Union of Students, did a report in 2010 called the Hidden Marks Report, which was about the experiences of sexual assault, harassment, abuse of women students at higher and further education institutions. And it's, you know, it's very real, and it would be wrong to say sort of Wadham or Oxford is sort of exempt from that.
When I was expecting my first baby, I went along to tell the domestic bursar, and it was a man at the time, and he looked at me, he said, you know, we've never had a pregnant librarian before. I thought, they do happen.
So a few years ago there were lots of babies among Wadham fellows, but also members of staff, and I think I raised at the time the possibility of having a changing table installed in some loo in the college, and I think there was a bit of resistance on the basis possibly of health and safety, a sense of like maybe bugs might be spread. And so I let it lie, because I actually started using the lovely leather sofa in the SCR to change my baby on. It's perfectly wipeable, so, you know, I thought that's as good a solution as any. So I didn't push the changing table agenda. And then a few years later, a male colleague of mine picked up that baton and raised it again, and now it's done. And I'm not saying it's because a man raised it, but I think, you know, it's a great change, and I think it was about time. I think it should have happened years back, but we've got it now. And, you know, maybe it's not so important how the change came about, but I think maybe, you know, still little moments where you pause and think and wonder why exactly it took a few years for that to happen.
I changed children all sorts of places. One of our graduate students used to look after his baby daughter sometimes when he was cataloguing. He'd be sitting in the workroom cataloguing, and his daughter would be sitting in the box my printer came in, because it was a very large, old-fashioned printer, and the box was huge, and it did as an impromptu playpen.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we discovered that a baby can have a full-scale tantrum in the office down here, and it's not audible upstairs.
I'm still concerned about why women don't necessarily come through so strongly in terms of academic results. I think that's an interesting question. And I do talk to my women students about something which I don't think is necessarily created by any means by the system, but it seems to be about the culture and their previous education as well, which means that women are sometimes quite diffident about really being ambitious in an academic situation, an exam situation, being uninhibited, trying something out, taking risks. And that's an issue that as a tutor I think is important for this college and other colleges, is addressing reasonably early on in women's academic career that tendency that some women have to stand back or to play safe, which gives them very strong, steady 2-1 degrees, but doesn't allow them to sort of fly and get the prizes and maybe get the academic jobs in the future. So that would be my concern. I don't think it's a Wadham-specific problem at all. I think it's widespread.
In a way, the hidden resistances, I mean, which continue even when I think people sometimes think that, you know, gender battles have actually, you know, been won. That, you know, it's partly exam performance, but it's partly also developing confidence in meetings, in interactions, beyond the formal academic interactions.
So I'm a loud person. I'm American, first of all, which means that my decibel level is automatically higher than everyone else's. But also, I have no problem projecting and never really think that my voice should not be heard. And it makes me sort of sad to see that I think there are female students here, more than male students, who have that feeling of not being sure if their voice should be heard, who have that crisis of confidence.
I think women are told to be quiet too often, and I feel that some of that might come through in the academia. I think women need to be pushed more in order to speak out in tutorials, and I find in a small setting where it's dominated a lot of the time by men, depending on your subject, that can sometimes be difficult.
Women still need to feel they have ownership of the place, they have ownership of this university, have ownership of tutorials and everything about college life. And I think, hopefully, I'd like to think that most women students feel that way, but I'm just trying to be sensitive to those issues whenever I have a group of students around the table, to feel that everyone feels that they are equally entitled to, to speak and to share their ideas.
Our curriculum is male and is designed for men, and even in tutorials, if you're in a tute with 3 women and 1 man, the man dominates the conversation. I've been in a tutorial where a girl has said something and the tutor's kind of not heard it, not listened to it, and as soon as the man says it, they listen. And those are kind of not malicious prejudices and just things that have been the status quo for so long that they're really hard to challenge, but they affect our performance and our confidence, and I think the curriculum needs to sort itself out.
Even though the student body at Wadham is very diverse and very much on the page of feminism, the academics aren't always there with you, or they're just a fewer women academics, although I know that Wadham's doing really great things to hire a lot more women.
Since I've started 12 years ago, I've moved up the kind of seniority, list to about, I'm now in the top 3rd already, which goes to show that, of course, 2/3 of the people who were there when I started have left and new people have come in, and I think a lot of those have been women.
So I have never had a female tutor. I've only ever had men teach me while I'm here. And that was probably going to be what it was like till I graduated, but I requested a couple of female tutors.
Whenever I came into the Porter's Lodge, or sometimes I'd come into the Porter's Lodge, and there was one particular porter who was lovely in many respects, but whenever I came in with some letters or something, he'd always say to me, "Sorry, whose secretary are you?"
Some of the porters who were, I suppose, used to talking to the male fellows and calling them sir, would occasionally call me sir, just by default, but that was just a slip of the tongue.
Nothing against porters. I think it's not anything about that individual. It's much more about the image we all have in our heads about what's an Oxford Don, and of course that image is still very, kind of insistently male, middle-aged, white, British. And I think the college is changing so much, and I think that image will change with time. But I think, everyone's got that image, men and women and students, and I think it's only going to happen quite slowly, that people won't expect that as the norm.
The problem is more from the outsider. The perception they get of an Oxford college is it's a man's world run by men with bowler hats. And it's not really like that.
The fact that there are more women in the college has been great from that point of view, because it means that you're not just regarded as, one of sort of 3 women, who are then held to sort of typify what a woman tutor is.
I think women still feel they have to perform more, better, further, as it were, in order to get to the same level as the men get to without thinking about it. I don't think this is actually the case. I still think a lot of women feel they have to do this.
I think it's just encouraging people to fulfill their potential on an individual level, and then of course also, what's really just a privilege in terms of being a tutor, is to see how people develop over those 4 years, and then also what they go on to do afterwards, and just to stay in touch with former students. You know, sometimes they get back to me asking for references, or you see them at reunions or degree ceremonies, and it's just so great to see these women who I think do pick up a lot of confidence and then go out into the world and do exciting things.
Correction, that's several links between Balliol and Cat at the bottom of the division. Half a link between Johns and Teddy Hall.
The college went mixed in 1974. A year later, a women's squad was established.
Some of the women got together and decided to do what the college least expected us to do, which was to form an 8. That nearly ended badly. We did have a catastrophic moment early in the Hillary term, I think, when we did succeed in capsizing the boat with all 8 of us in it. What then happened was that it turned out that actually we were reasonably good by the standards of that time. And there weren't any women's divisions in 8's week at that time, because there weren't enough women in Oxford rowing. And our only option was to try and row on to be part of the bottom division of the men's event. And obviously none of us got in, but our boat was the best of the women's boats.
In 1976, there was a women's division established for summer 8s.
So the second year was the year when they first created a women's division for 8's week. And we came ahead of the river. There was a certain feeling, and I think that was one of the very rare moments when people were ungenerous, that there was a certain feeling that this didn't really count. And so we weren't given a bump supper. But the warden stepped in, and he simply invited the whole of the crew onto high table for dinner. I think at his own expense, and so we had our celebration that way. But it sort of hadn't really established itself as a comparable activity. But that moment passed. It wasn't a source of great indignation. It was just slightly irritating. Well, I think the men weren't too pleased also because we were a novelty. The local newspaper came and took a photograph, full-page photograph of us, which appeared in the local newspaper, and they said, well, you know, we've been rowing for years and building up our reputation, and the women come along and immediately get their photograph in the paper. It's the slightly embarrassing photograph that's in the Wadham book.
Since then, we've been very successful staying with our first women's boat at the top of the divisions. And this year we've been very, very successful in taking our first crew to head of the river in both Torpids and 8s. Participation in rowing in particular is really important for the girls that we see come into this squad. I think a lot of them look at us on the river and think, wow, I could never do that. And I think our main objective is to show them that yes, you can do that, and give them that sense of self-efficacy and confidence, and to challenge things that they think are impossible for them, and show them that they can achieve whatever they work for. The thing that drives you to carry on is that you know how much your participation affects the generations that come after you, and how much it is important to contribute while you're here, and it's effectively giving back already. You're nurturing the next generation.
Right from the word go, there is Dorothy. She's right up there as you walk through the gates, and I was very quickly introduced to Dorothy as this powerful Somerset lady who set up the whole college, or was behind that.
I think she's always like a really good talking point, because when I talk to people about my college, I'm like, yeah, no, it was founded by this woman called Dorothy, but she never came here.
I'd love to have met her. I'd love to meet her now, just in the King's Arms, and ask her a few questions about how difficult it was, because she must have been one tenacious lady.
She sort of reminds me of the type of lady that, makes a point very clearly, especially being that age, starting off at that age.
Also, I love that it's Dorothy and Nicholas, but Dorothy's the main character because so often if there's a wife, she's kind of consigned to a supporting role.
She comes across as this extraordinarily feisty person who took an enormous interest in the development of the college. I think it's right that she'd never visited it when it had been, after it had been built, but she sent this amazing stream of letters deciding when the fellows of the college should be allowed to spend money on new gowns, or whether indeed one of the fellows should have permission to travel abroad.
The original scholars of the college were required to swear that they wouldn't disrupt the place by using sort of odious language or actually making, inappropriate comparisons, of I think family, country, and learning against other members of the community.
She was a leader of men, as it turned out. It wasn't just that she enabled the buildings to be constructed and the college to take shape, but she had strong views about what should happen inside the buildings.
And I think that's actually quite an important principle that, in a sense, we still, invoke in terms of actually being open to difference and open to, thinking about what real conversation in a community of trust actually means. So, in a sense, I think one can extrapolate from that, into different forms of diversity, which obviously she couldn't have conceivably, been aware of.
Of course, the irony is that Dorothy Wadham did not found a college for women, and she would probably be quite, I don't know what she'd think about the college if she saw it today, because of course society has changed beyond recognition.
If one goes back to, Dorothy's original vision for the college, obviously she couldn't have envisioned women in the college, but she did envision a college that, within the context of the time, actually had a mixed, identity and would draw on people from, different, parts of the country, different communities.
She was a woman, but was maybe not the best feminist, but I hope that Dorothy Wadham would be proud. She's become such an icon in so many ways.
I like seeing her picture in Hall because she is one of the, I think possibly the only woman in Hall, and I like that she is just so undeniably at the centre of Wadham.
Everyone's like secretly proud of Dorothy, even though no one could have ever known her or met her.
I think the danger, as I see it, is a kind of tokenistic approach, that we've got this woman, she's in the kind of stone carving above the hall entrance. There's a portrait of her in Hall, as of course the only woman in the hall of all our portraits there. And just the sense that we've got a foundress sometimes creates, a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling, but I think there's just always the danger that there's complacency about that sort of moment in the college's history. I think Dorothy, the historical person, I don't personally feel a great deal of affinity to, but nonetheless I feel the fact that a woman was able to found a college which is still there 400 years later and which has evolved with the times and which has become a really progressive college within Oxford. That, I think, is what I found. That's what I think is sort of humbling, and also is an obligation to us to feel that, if a woman could do this in the 17th century, hopefully the women that come out of Wadham these days will feel just as confident in trying to make their mark in the world and to change things, make a difference, have some sort of legacy.
I think it'll just get more seamless.
A lot more women will feel like they can progress within the college, going for a higher office, heads of departments. We've already seen quite a few heads of departments are female, but there needs to be a lot more ladies coming forward and saying, well, I can do that just as well as a man,
We'd expect or hope for the gender equality amongst fellows and stuff to be much better. Absolutely. I mean, because now the people coming in at the undergraduate level, increasingly the graduate level, are more equal in terms of gender splits. So hopefully, and I think we should expect it and should hold that accountable for that to kind of feed up as people kind of mature into academics.
When I was student age, I couldn't have imagined being a woman priest. That concept was only just beginning, and for me it wasn't until I saw role models that I could aspire to that I made that sort of change of career. And so I would love to see the student generation now becoming the academics and the tutors and maybe even the warden of the future.
It won't be a surprise if a women fellow is appointed. It won't be a surprise if women are a mainstream topic of study. I think that it should become kind of naturalised in a way.
I hope that women here stay active in activism, stay radical, try and cultivate this like sort of radical space that we are cultivating here, and using Wadham, the college, the rooms, the gardens, as a space for dialogue and debate, but also, the safe spaces that we have. We have Wadham feminist like discussion groups and spaces where people can share and talk about what they're going through. And so I think keeping that alive would be great.
I think ironically in a college which is self-consciously liberal and progressive like Wadham, there's a real danger of complacency and of feeling that battles have been won. In that sense, I think the challenges are more subtle and more more hidden in a way. I think a lot of women students, particularly again in a college like Wadham, where actually as part of the student body, I think there are lots of questions which are absolutely central to their agendas and lots of things that can be debated within the context of Wadham, which actually aren't necessarily so easy to debate on a wider stage. So I think the challenges really are being alert to the resistances which are out there in the world at large.
Wadham does have quite a strong and confident feminist tradition, and I think that's very good. And I'm hoping that the students that pass through here, that they'll take that away with them, that it's not a bad thing to stand up for women's rights. It's not that you just have to fit in and be complacent and pleasant and not mention the fact that there are problems, but that you can feel entitled to raise those issues, and you can feel that there's solidarity and that your male peers will support you in that as well.
There are ways in which new issues are pushed up the agenda, quite rightly, issues of race, issues of sexuality, which can, if you're not careful, actually be treated again in isolation, and all these things should actually be thought about in a much more joined up way.
We can tend to see women's experience as singular, and it's not. Like, women at Wadham come from different places and have different life experiences and represent different liberation groups and different socio-economic groups, and I think that needs to be acknowledged and kind of shouted about, because we're 40 years on and we've still got situations where queer women have a harder time, women of colour, if they are even here, they have a really hard time. And I think glossing over the problem and saying we've solved the problem of women is not working, because women are not one body with one thought process.
Then still needs to be a lot of work done in terms of access, particularly for women of colour, women with disabilities, queer women, trying to involve them and show them that they're really, really welcomed here. Women, women from different economic backgrounds. I think, access still needs to be improved.
I hope that in 40 years' time, all of these discussions that we have about women at Wadham and feminism are more conscientious about women with disabilities and how you can fit women with disabilities into your discussions about feminism. I mean, in Oxford specifically, which is a place that's so physically inaccessible, a lot of times meetings are held in physically inaccessible places, or people have communication barriers to get into the meetings. Like if they're hearing impaired, people don't pay attention to what they can do to make communication easier for people, people who have hearing issues, and same for visual issues or social anxieties. I could go on and on.
So the SU's done a lot of great work that I'm really proud of and proud to have been involved with about trans students and inclusivity in events. We've tried to edit the SU constitution so that the definition of a woman is broader and more all-encompassing and encompasses anybody who identifies with the word woman as a part of their identity. And I think a lot of the great work that's been done has come from the students. They've really made efforts to alter their language and alter just kind of the way that we frame events to ensure that they are inclusive. And also we're really lucky to have some of the university's strongest trans voices here at Wadham, and they've taught me and Diana a lot, and I know that we kind of learn from them every day and just try to keep improving ourselves.
As a woman of colour myself, I think identifying with people and having role models is really important, and at the moment I'm not seeing a lot of that, and so feminist issues are discussed, but women of colour are quite invisible in that, and people keep talking about intersectionality, but it's not really shown in the actions that are going on. So I think there needs to be an effort to make those voices heard.
I'd like to see Wadham take the lead in declaring that there are issues and addressing them actively. I think there's a fear that if we talk about difference, if we talk about that things aren't seamless yet for all sorts of groups, that the press or the wider world will think that Wadham has a problem, but actually everyone has a problem, and what Wadham needs is the courage to say that there is a problem and to proactively try to fix it.
I don't know what it will look like, but I hope that it will keep doing what it's doing and striving to be better and do better, and constantly learning and being critical of itself and of what it's doing, and doing all the radical things that it does already. And I just really hope that it continues to drive forward in that way, and I hope that women continue to be at the very forefront of that movement as well.